Welcome back after the short break. I'm sorry about that, but it's a little pressed for time. So we'll continue with our various explorations of listening and forms of silencing with a presentation by Noack Angell, who's an artist based in London, originally from the USA, who has produced similar lectures that we're going to hear now in the Freud Museum in London, and also the Youth Salon Biennial in Zagreb. And he's currently making a film using the British Colonial Film Archive, so watch out for that coming up. I think it's called Lux Imperium, right? And why I was so happy to have Noah as part of the program is because, for me, his presentations of his collection of ethnographic field recordings speak to me not only about the kind of fantastic range of voices that were captured by this very medium, but also he maintains one ear on the kind of the form of listening that ethnography itself conducts. And so, without further ado, I would like you to welcome Noack Angell. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yep. Okay. So what we've just heard is a recording of two Inuit women, Alassokand and Nelly Noack, singing The Sound of the Wind. This is taken from Inuit throat and harp songs, Eskimo women's music of Puvung Nituk, recorded in the month of July in 1979 and released in 1980 on the Canadian Musical Heritage Collection label, catalog number MH001. These throat songs take the form of two women standing face to face, hands on each other's shoulders, and eyes fixed in an intertwining, hyper-rhythmic mimicry of environmental sounds of all sorts. There are songs on this LP that are based on motifs of panting dogs, of boiling water, and even the sound of the northern lights. The notes suggest that the Inuit, quote, eye is subservient to the ear, that, quote, they might define a space more by sound than by sight. Where others might say, let's see what we can hear, they would say, let's hear what we can see. The songs often end in laughter as the women begin to hyperventilate. Living in an igloo, the sound of the wind is what might constitute silence much of the year, and it might be said that imitating the wind is the oral baseline in the economy of throat singing. On the plains of the East Arctic, there is nothing, sound or otherwise, that isn't formed in large part by the unrelenting glacial winds. All sounds are filtered through them and are carried forth in gusts, whose melody pours forth endlessly. Their short breaths seem to be informed by this climate. The abrupt formation of syllables serves to minimize their exposure to the cold air and at the same time generate heat through rapid, repetitive movement. In a rare instance of ethnography written directly by its subject, with little qualifying outside commentary, Alasokand describes the song in the accompanying notes. Quote, "When listening to the sound of the wind going through the cracks of an igloo and also blowing on the harpoon or through the rope of the tent, it should be listened to because it sounds like the tune makes sense. The wind is talking or making music." Their message about the wind is direct. You should listen to it. It makes sense. To allow two indigenous women the space to define the wind and to instruct us as to how it should be listened to is a modest gesture that acts as a small corrective to the positivist bent that has plagued not only science but the arts and humanities as well. For instance, John Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds is only significant as a symptom of all that was excluded from consideration in Western musical thought. The idea that the wind, or the insects, or the ambient sounds of a forest could be described as a song is far from a revelatory notion for much of the world. Now, I've sort of used that recording as an introduction. I was asked to present to you today field recordings that focus upon the politics of silence, the inaudible and the barely audible. And while we have begun with the throat songs of the women of Pavang-Nituq, I would like to offer a counterpoint in the panpipe ensembles of the RR of the Solomon Islands. The following recording is from the Flûtes de Pan Mélanésien, RR Volume 2, on a 3-volume set, which is published on Discs Vogue in collection with the collection Musée d'Ilham. This is catalog number LDM 30105, released in 1972, recorded in 1969 by Hugo Zemp. Like the Inuit throat songs, the panpipe ensembles of the RR mimic environmental sounds, but where the Inuit sound is reflective of the sharp, below-freezing winds, the RR's melodies are languid. They sway as one does on a hot day. Where 2 women enact the Inuit throat songs, the panpipe ensemble we are about to hear is made up of 10 men and performed in a ritual context to do with ancestor worship and patriarchal lineage. In the track we're about to hear, the ensemble mimics the singing of a deaf mute. The liner notes address the following clip in these terms, quote, "Punu, deaf mute. This piece was composed by Nulasai and is based upon the singing of a deaf mute, in other words, the weak and inarticulate songs he made." What we hear is a carefully stylized redeployment of the rhythmic phrasing of the deaf mute's song, the hesitation, the plodding forth and attempting to vocalize, and the faltering. It is quite a proposition to use the song of one who can't hear oneself as the basis for a composition. It can perhaps be read as a collectivized sublimation of failed speech. None of the ensemble are deaf mutes themselves, but surely all have felt inarticulate and have experienced mechanical problems in executing speech acts. To make a song of the one member of the community who has trouble singing along, especially in a ritual context, would seem a small symbolic attempt to resolve these conflicts for all concerned. The motif is played once quietly to verify that all the players know the tune, and then twice more within a procession of 11 such songs. Now the next recording, which we'll hear, comes from Music Dyack, which is also on Discs Vogue, catalog number LDM 30108, recorded and annotated by Pierre Ivanov, which was recorded in 1953 and 54 and released in 1972. The Dyack are native nomadic farmers of the interior forests of Borneo. They have been perhaps over-mythologized on account of their practice of headhunting. Headhunting is a means of making offerings to the gods in order to receive good fortune, though it is a skill that does not go unused in times of conflict. After being outlawed by Dutch colonial powers in 1923, it seemed to disappear for decades, only to resurface again in attacks on Indonesian Madurese settlers between 1996 and 2003. I have an acquaintance that visited the area around that time and was shown Polaroids that evidence the reemergence of headhunting. In the following recording, we have a flute solo by an unnamed performer, here described only as an old Penahing woman. It is said in the notes that, quote, even more than the gong, this instrument puts the Dyack into such an emotional state that he is incited to go headhunting. Since 1923, it says, the authorities have tried to eliminate this flute. It is now only played by a few old women. This falls into a subcategory of ethnographic material, recorded speech or music whose distribution was restricted among those to whom it had traditionally belonged, but which was made available, this time by a French ethnographer, without qualification to outsiders. A similar one that comes to mind is an Australian Aboriginal field recording titled Arnhem Land, which comes with a sticker affixed to the cover warning something to the effect that these recordings should under no circumstances be played in the presence of Aboriginal peoples on account of the fact that they may believe that they are hearing the sound of a dead loved one, which may cause them great mental distress. It is hard to know whether this bit of advice is pragmatic or condescending in the extreme. Of course, there are certainly plenty of people of Aboriginal descent who own record players, and the situation of those who still live indigenously is also complex. It's not uncommon to see indigenous peoples photographed in these booklets wearing sunglasses, for instance. However absurd this warning might read, it serves to remind us of the extent to which in the early days of recorded sound, an important feature was the ability to hear from the dead after they had departed. It seems somewhat remarkable that this has become so banal a reality after little more than 100 years. It is, of course, typical of colonial law to prohibit acts which serve as key coordinates for indigenous worldview that does not recognize the legitimacy of the occupying state. To do so is generally quite an effective method of forcing forgetfulness. Okay, now the following recording is of the Reverend Charlie Jackson, and it was self-recorded on a cassette tape. Charlie Jackson was a traveling preacher who played his electric guitar to churches all over rural Louisiana. He sometimes played in a register of immersive noise near in intensity to the Velvet Underground, Circle White Light, White Heat, but in a vein wholly consistent with the tradition of the black church, with people catching the Holy Ghost, that is, being possessed left and right. Jackson died in 2006 at the age of 73, and in the period following his death, his widow gave my friend Adam Lohr a box of over 100 hours of cassette tapes from which he had edited 2 volumes of recordings. All of those recordings, with the exception of what we're about to hear, were documents of live church services. This is taken from Volume 1, entitled You Got to Move, released on Lohr's 50 Miles of Elbow Room label. This is not an ethnographic record, but a gospel record. It shares with an ethnographic record that it is a non-studio recording that documents a given community performing its central rituals. There are, of course, ethnographies which feature gospel music, in many cases the difference being whether it is self-released and a means of fulfilling the Christian imperative to spread the word and strengthen the church which issued it, or whether it takes a more distantiated view of that community, identifying them as a subject of research, and in doing so making them strange and unintelligible. Though it is not an ethnographic record, it is interesting to think of it as one, i.e., to ask how it reflects the values of the community in which this performance would be heard. Especially so in the case of this recording, where there is no attendant audience. Charlie Jackson is alone, and absent any clear signifier, it also seems certain that it was recorded after midnight. When I've done the best I can, I want my crown, is about being received in heaven. This recording was dubbed onto the end of a tape of church services labeled Star Hill Baptist Church, St. Francisville, Louisiana, July 16th, 1972. At this time, Jackson was recovering from a stroke that left him without the ability to speak for 30 days. He sang as a means of rehabilitation, for as his speech therapist at the time, Glenda Barnes, explained, typically singing is easier to get back than speech. And so we hear the Reverend stirring within himself, a very public local religious figure in an utterly private moment, taking care to find a vocal tone appropriate for the purpose of prayer and then withdrawing, submerged in thought or religious ecstasy, only to surface again, asking after his crown. The recording takes on a negative economy when his voice begins to dip out, as we infer an intensifying internal state into which he has been absorbed. He pauses as a listener, only to hear that the song must continue. His pauses remind us of the absent congregation who would normally use those empty spaces as a call and response prompt to praise, testify, or let loose a joyful noise. Perhaps he imagines their presence. Perhaps he hears them. Within the shifting polyphony of quiet spaces, we hear prayer, musical ideas being tried out and flung about, and a process of recovery, of the capacity for speech being rebuilt, all in an under-the-breath communion with God. He fiddles audibly with the tape recorder at the beginning and end so that he can be heard clearly in his plea.
When I'm done the best I can, I want a crown. When I'm done the best I can, I want a crown. When I'm done the best I can, when I'm done the best I can, I want my crown. When I'm done the best I can, want a crown. Sometimes stumbling, falling down, best I can. I want my crown. When I'm done the best I can, I want my crown. When I'm done the best I can, want my crown. Sometimes stumbling, falling down, almost level to the ground. When I'm done the best I can, I want the crown. Lord, when I know how much suffered, and it was all sin and spare, try my carry out my gospel message. I came out every day when my sword and my shield. I'm gonna stay on the battlefield. When I done the best I can, I want a crown. Throughout my battle, all through my body fever, and I sometimes racking in pain. But like Joe, wait with patience, having a crown I want to grind. When I do, sometimes I go running home when the victory have been done. When I done best I can, have a crown. When I get up in glory, sitting round God right the stone, and the saints all angels, they'll crown him out on, and I want him to say, and crown. When I'm done best I can, I want a crown.
And for the final selection, we have a recording from Tuva, Voices from Central Asia, which was published on Folkways, catalog number SF40017, recorded in 1987 and 88 by Eduard Alexis, Zoya Kyrgyz, and Ted Levin. Now, to draw a contrast between the previous recording of the Dayak that emphasized the coerced forgetfulness of colonial law, here we have an example in which the preservation of folklore under the guise of promoting national heritage effectively erases and displaces knowledge of an act's agency and meaning. To quote Laurent Albert in The Music of the Other, on why the study of folklore as a subset of ethnography was eventually discredited, quote, "For the governmental powers concerned, the perversion, codification, and mediazation of musical and choreographic folkloric forms of often ritual origin constituted ideal instruments of propaganda and normalization. The intervention was to eradicate the substratum of beliefs and practices in which these expressions were anchored, preserving instead the appearance, or rather a counterfeit, depleted of all substance, all metaphysical significance, and wholly detached from its factual context." This was especially so in the former Soviet states. As an example, we have Alexander Davakai, who in the following recording performs a shamanic healing ritual, of which only a short extract is made available. Davakai is noted as an actor in the Kazil dramatic theater, exactly the sort of state-organized troupe described above, who has long and convincingly acted the role of a shaman in plays. Yet the reality is more complex. He comes from a hereditary line of shamans, observed many shamanic rites in his youth, and is said to be, quote, "intrigued by the question of whether shamanic power really exists." So here we have one who would almost surely be initiated as a shaman, who would be quite central to the life of his community as it had traditionally existed, reduced to a sideline spectator, a mime, one who is left wondering how real the calling of his fathers had ever been to begin with. It's a sort of shadow play in which the state pays a performer to play a role in the theater so as to promote an image of the past, and in doing so removes from this figure all agency in the present. So silence in this example is not formally silence at all. All the audible contours of local shamanic tradition are there, but the substance has been muted. To paraphrase the often repeated cliche about the sun being extinguished, when instrumentalized by the state, it is possible that a tradition may appear to be alive, and even in vibrant form, long after it's gone out.